So if there's no principled approach, do you think this formula of reform will go far?
It won't. He says, "Auzu billahi minash shaitani was siyasati." Like he says,
सलामती है उन आंखों पे जो हिदायत पे नजरें जमाए बैठी हैं, उन कानों पे जो जिक्र खैर के मुंतजर रहते हैं और उन कदमों पे जो हिदायत की राह पे गामजन हैं।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Muhammad Hassan Ilyas from Ghamdi Center of Islamic Learning. Today I was joined by our distinguished guest and scholar, Brother Mustafa Akyol. Welcome to our center. Mustafa is a very famous Turkish writer, journalist, scholar. He wrote about reforms in Islam. He talked about tradition. He talked about try to bridge the gaps between the communities and the most prominent recent developments in the contemporary era. So, Brother Mustafa, I welcome you to our center, and it's been an honor to host you here. I want to talk about some ideas which you developed in your book about the reforms. But first of all, tell us about your background, where you grew up, how the society and the Turkish culture impact on your grooming.
First of all, thank you, Brother Hassan, for generously hosting me in Dallas for this trip that I had and kindly hosting me here. It's a beautiful center. I mean,
Thank you very much.
I have great respect for the ideas of Sheikh Ghamidi Sahib,
Yep.
as we say. But even the center is really beautiful. Thank you. As you said, I'm from Turkey. I'm Turkish, born and raised, and I'm an Ottoman Muslim, as I tell people. And I'm in the U.S. in the U.S. in the past 8-9 years. So before that, I was based in Turkey. I grew up in Ankara, Istanbul. My father is a big writer, intellectual in Turkey, writing with respected tradition, but with modern ideas as well, more on politics and history. I grew up in a family like that. I became what I call people a born-again Muslim in my college years in Turkey. There was a strong movement of go back to the Quran.
Okay.
And a little bit skeptical of some approaches in the tradition, but very much intensely study the Quran, learn the Quran. So I was affiliated with that. I was also in those early years very much focused on defending the Islamic faith against the atheist, ideas of the time.
The secular movements at that time.
Yeah, and because Turkey has a very strong secular tradition and intolerant secularism, which I always opposed, like banning hijab. That also had a component of scientific materialism, seeing religion as an outdated idea. Turkish atheists had translated Richard Dawkins into Turkish. And we had a small institute for science and learning and religion. And I wanted to write a rebuttal against that. So we got some Christian books, internet was new at the time in the late 90s. And I remember the first time I came to the United States, it was a conference on rational theism. It was about Christians, mostly Christians, rebuttal, how do you oppose atheist ideas? The atheist interpretation of Darwinism was criticized. So in those years, I was actually mostly fascinated with science and religion. I started to write about those things in Turkey. When there was a hearing in Kansas in 2005 about whether intelligent design should be in schools, they invited me as a guest, from Turkey to give a testimony at the education department in Kansas, because I had written a lot about how Muslims approach science and how science can be weaponized against religion. It shouldn't be if it is empirically studied.
So you must be impressed with the Harun Yahya at that time.
Yes, but I mean, that gentleman has a bizarre movement, and I dissociated myself with that. But in Turkey, it was a circle of different people looking into these ideas.
Okay.
I learned much more from the books of Said Nursi, who I respect a lot. Of course, he passed away in 1960, very old figure. But he was a great Islamic scholar, Kurdish in origin, Ottoman scholar, who resisted the authoritarian secularization in Turkey very well. And his books, his Risale Nur, as we call it, is really defense of Islam, Islamic faith. At the same time, though, he supported his followers to vote in a democratic system, which was a taboo for some people. He defended Ottoman constitutionalism back at the time. Hurriya, freedom, was the code for constitution. So he defended those. And so he had a modernist side as well. Anyway, I just kept writing about these things in Turkey first, and I was writing in English. After that, 9/11 happened in America. And I realized, oh my God, this country is now obsessed about Islam. I mean, understandably so. This terrible thing happened with some extremist group acting in the name of Islam. And I actually called one of my Christian friends. I said, like, I want to write about people were speaking about jihad. Like, I want to write about this. He said, yeah, there is a publication called National Review. It's good, write for them. So I sent an article as a pitch. This was 2003, I think. And they published it. And the title was Al-Qaeda is Violating Islam's Rules of Jihad.
Wow. Okay.
Because I said in jihad, you don't target innocent civilians, right? You don't kill women and children. That's a hadith from our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, beloved Prophet. And that Islamic law actually codified that. And some of the extremist groups are finding ways to overcome that, but that's against it. So I wrote against that. Then some Islamophobes wrote against that article. No, Al-Qaeda is real Islam. This is a Trojan horse argument.
Okay.
And I said, wow, this country, there's something going on here. So although I was based in Turkey, and in Turkey, I became a columnist for 2 different newspapers, one in Turkish, one in English, Hürriyet Daily News. So I was writing 4 articles a week on issues of religion, society. Turkey was at the time joining the European Union. How can we should we join the European Union? Is it an Islamic thing? What about their legal reforms? How do we make a sense of that? They speak about religious freedom. Is that a good thing? Yes, but what about some of our, jurisprudential issues? Yeah. I really struggled with these as someone who's an intellectual activist, writing, thinking. And over the years, and in 2011, I published a book in the US. All those publishing led to more. Islam without extremes, a Muslim case for liberty, which got translated into languages. And I started writing for New York Times after that for about 10 years in 2010s on issues about Charlie Hebdo murders and what does Islam say about this and that kind of stuff. So all that work ultimately brought me a position to work at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C. Cato is a libertarian think tank, which means classical ideas of liberty, individual freedom, limited government, peace. So it's an anti-war institution, which is, I think, important in America today.
It's a very accomplished journey you just told us. Yeah. So tell us about the Turkish society, because we were living in the Pakistan or India, but not much aware of what's going on within the society. Yeah. What we knew is that, when the Kemal Atatürk came, he applied the secularism there, and there's some resistance from the Islamists, and then the Islamists turned to be a political party, and they came to the power. What is really going on within the Turkish society? How people see, the different narrative? Do they live together or they oppose together? What about going on between the families? If you're a part of, secular thought, you will still be a part of your family. How do you see the society in general about the Turkey?
Great question. I begin Turkey's story not with the Atatürk era, as a lot of people do, but with the Ottoman era.
Okay.
Turkey is the continuation of the Ottoman Empire. It's a break from the Ottoman Empire, but it's a continuation. When you go to Istanbul, you see beautiful institutions, the buildings. It was built by Sultan Abdülhamid or Sultan Abdülmecid, and I wish actually the Ottoman Empire continued. I think it was one of the big mistakes in history to destroy the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Caliphate, I think, was a big mistake. But in late Ottoman Empire, also, the Ottomans in the 19th century started to ask this question: what went wrong? Like, we were a great empire. Everybody was seeing us as the great majestic empire. Now they see us as the sick man of Europe. Yep. They became backwards in terms of science and technology. To learn technology, they have to import people from Europe. The Europes certainly had progressed materially, not ethically necessarily. Some ethical too, maybe abolition of slavery, some human rights standards too, but they also had a colonial side, which always is two sides of that coin. And ultimately, Ottoman Empire started reforms. First, science and technology, but also political reforms as well. For example, they saw Christians like Serbs and Greeks becoming independent, throwing rebellions against the empire. To win hearts and minds, they declared equal citizenship, as opposed to dhimmi, laws, which is very much criticized. So the Caliphate actually declared equal citizenship for the Jews and Christians with the Constitution of 1876. And there is a tradition there some people call Ottoman liberalism, but Islamic liberalism. They justified a parliament saying Quran says shura, right? I mean, so those arguments, which Sayyid Ahmed Khan brought to the continent to some extent. Yep. You see that trend in the Ottoman Empire. I very much sympathize with that and see myself as associated with that intellectually. Then came Kemal Atatürk, who was not he was an Ottoman military general, but he was representing a very unique anti-religious almost strain in late Ottoman thought. So he was different from these Ottoman religious liberals.
Okay.
He wanted to imitate the French. He was very much influenced by French Enlightenment. So he created Turkey as a secular republic and an illiberal secularism, illiberal opposite of liberal.
Okay.
Like he banned Islamic schools. He put people like Said Nursi in jail. He banned madrasas. And I've been always critical of that authoritarian draconian secularism, which has been a big problem for our ummah.
What was the reason of that reaction from that?
Because he was convinced that Islam is the reason for our backwardness.
Okay.
Islam is the obstacle to progress. They had the slogan. He didn't maybe personally say that out loud, but I think that was his thinking. And you can see that Shukri Haniol has a great book. And he was influenced by the continental ideas of French especially, or some German, of religion is a thing of the past. Let's get rid of religion. We'll be all modern, and we'll all French be like and have wine and dine, and we'll be modern. So even forcing people to change their clothes, right? I mean, so I think that was a wrong take in Turkish history. And of course, Turkey's conservative Muslims didn't like this. They started to resist this, but not violently. Like, right? I mean, at the long term of education and social activism, civil society, Said Nursi is a part of that, and ultimately some political movement which led to today's President Erdogan.
Yep.
Now, but there is a 50 years in between, between the hardcore Atatürk era and the coming of Erdogan.
Yep.
And you have actually something in Turkey called center-right. I actually also like that too. These were leaders like Adnan Menderes, Demirel, or Turgut Özal. They didn't take Turkey away from the Europeanization path, but they brought more respect to religion.
Also, the İminönü, you see.
İsmet İnönü was an heir of Atatürk. He was a milder version of Atatürk.
Okay.
That's good, but actually he opened the way for democracy. That's good.
Okay.
But the others were, like Turgut Özal, my hero intellectually as a president, 83 to 93. He said, we need three freedoms. Freedom of markets, freedom of ideas, and freedom of religion.
Wow.
And he went to Hajj, and the secularists were crazy. How can a prime minister can go to Hajj? Like, they were not used to that. Kemalists would never ever do that. So, and he said, my grandmother is a Sufi. What's the problem? So he was proud of his Muslimness, but he also put Turkey to the European Union track. So they were not Islamists, as some people think today, anti-Western. No, they wanted to have a good relations with the West, and they want to modernize, but with respect to Islam, as opposed to the Kemalists who always had a negative take on Islamic tradition. Ultimately, AKP, today's President Erdogan came to power in 2002. Initially, they followed that line for the first 10 years, so I was more supportive. Then there was a little bit turn, honestly. I began criticizing them. But I still think I'm trying to be fair to today's Turkey. There are problems in Turkey about freedom of speech, rule of law. I am critical of them. There's definitely authoritarianism. But also, I'm glad that Turkey is back in the world stage as a defender of this ummah. Because I think the Kemalists said we had nothing to do with the Muslim world, right? We just want to be joining the West, and that's it. And I think even the West doesn't respect that. You want to imitate them, then what's the value in that? Also, I'm glad Erdogan's government, and people around him supported Syria to come out of the Assad tyranny, and now trying to revive Syria after terrible destruction, standing for Gaza. Sometimes the language gets out of control, but I think they care for other Muslims, and I value that. I care for the Ummah as well. I'm critical of certain things about the Turkish government today, but I'm not with the people who kind of depict it as a dictatorship that has to be coupled or anything like that.
There's one central right. What about the relationship between the communities? Like, we in Pakistan, we are very much polarized. Like, even there's a polarization between the ethnic groups and then the religious groups and then the sectarian thing, Deobandi, Barelvi, Shia, Sunni, all of this. So what's in Turkey? Because you all are Hanafis, right? There's no much divide in the religious beliefs. So,
yes, by and large, Turks are Hanafi. Kurds are Shafi, so that's another ethnic group, of course, in Turkey, and whose rights have not been recognized for a long time, and that was a problem. But in Turkey, and we have small Shia community too, but not big. But the real problem in Turkey is not Hanafi versus something else. It's about different charismatic leaders, all maybe Hanafi. You might have heard about this Gülen group, which went against the government. Well, they're Hanafi, the government is Hanafi too. It's not Hanafism, it's about political power. And as a religious group, they should not have claimed to rule the state. And they tried to do that with some dirty tactics. And I think that brought on them the wrath of the state in very, I think, disproportionate way. But I think Said Nursi has a good advice. He says, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitani wa siyasati." Like he says, from the devil and the politics, I should stay away. And they didn't follow that. I think they should have followed. But there are different groups. One big difference, of course, is less observant Turks and the more pious Turks. Right? I mean, people who wear hijab or pray 5 times a day, and the rest of Turkish society which doesn't do that. But I think that's okay. I mean, in a society, not everybody has to be that pious. And if they're not, you can maybe preach your religion, but you cannot coerce them. And I think today, for a long time, the problem in Turkey was coercion from the secular side.
Okay.
Like they were trying to ban people from wearing hijab. And I was very much against that for decades. Because it was a French secularism even more harsh than France, because France doesn't deal with universities, at least. They were banning hijab in universities. Now, those things have been lifted. That's good. And now there's a little bit of conservatives having the upper hand and using the state. That is also a problem.
Yeah.
And I think it shouldn't go towards that direction. But I think after 100 years of a republic, and also one thing, Ataturk did some good things as well. I mean, I think he gave equal rights to women. So that was totally fine. That's a good reform. His secularism was too of a top-down secularism, which didn't leave room for religion. In Iran, the Shah imitated that.
Yep.
And the Shah never opened, though, opened the way for democracy. So the Shah was replaced by his son, who was another dictator, and then came Khomeini, and it was a violent revolution, and it created a dictatorship towards the other direction.
Yep.
I think Turkey was lucky compared to Iran, let's say, because it was able to experiment with democracy.
Yeah.
Islamists had to enter the political system and win municipalities and show that they make things work well. So I think despite all its internal problems, I think Turkey is today an interesting story to look into for other Muslims. And one thing, not owning the state made Turkish Islam actually sometimes healthier.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You had a more moral high ground. Now, when you own the state, some corruption starts to begin, and actually that is hurting the image of religion in today's Turkey, for example, to some extent.
Okay.
I believe in a healthy separation of state power and religion, not to oppress the religion, obviously, but so that religious communities can work with the moral realm, with preaching, by winning hearts and minds, by building communities, families, whereas the state should be neutral towards different groups and even different religions.
Right.
I know in Pakistan, of course, mostly Sunni, there are Shia citizens, there are Ahmadi citizens. I know it's a controversial issue. I'm not saying their ideas are right, they're not in my view, but they're citizens, right?
Yep.
I believe states should be neutral towards the citizens, whatever we think about their ideas. They can be atheist, they can be Christian, they can be from a different sect. And I think whenever you say the state should uphold the true religion, always somebody ends up to be the victim.
Yep, that's
because
true.
The true religion is, according to me, according to you, yours, or this sect. Or when you go to Islamic world today, in Sunni majority countries, the Shia are persecuted or under threat.
Yes.
In Shia majority Iran, Sunnis have huge discrimination complaints, persecution as well. That's why I actually believe not in a secular state, a bit like the United States, where the state isn't promoting any religion but respecting all of them, right? And actually in the US, people say the idea of a secular state developed because of religious freedom, because there were so many churches. If you choose one of them, the other one will be discriminated. So that all of them can coexist. I think that's a healthy approach in Islam. Of course, some will say, "Oh, we need Khilafah period problem." Well, I don't think, and late Ottoman scholars always didn't think like that. I think the caliphate could have stayed like a Vatican. Going back to that,
and it can help. It can help Muslims to show their glory, and their powers can be channelized. You know, we have one caliphate. We are power in some, maybe in the region. So, okay, let's move forward. Tell me about the case study of secularism in Turkey. We believe as a Muslim, because when we believe on any divine conduct from the God, we know there are some instruction for myself individually, and there are something which is related to a state. When Muslims have a power, they need to do something, and they're very few, but state has to act and accept these instructions from the God commands. Now, how do you see, with the case study of Turkey, is there any place of secularism in the Muslim majority countries? Because, the Muslims have their tradition, and when they will come to the power, they have to obey the God law, whatever they think the God law is. So the secularism has no place in the Muslim majority countries. What do you think about that?
I would say obeying God's law and enforcing God's law are two different things.
Right.
Right? I think we Muslims, give an example. Is praying 5 times a day a commandment, a farz in Islam? Yes, it is.
Yes, it
right?
is.
Yeah. I should do it as a Muslim,
Yeah,
right? What if my neighbor doesn't do it?
Yeah, we don't have any right to do anything.
Well, our traditional ulama brought punishments in jurisprudence about, if someone gives up prayer. But that's not in the Quran. It was the way they understood society and community. I think Muslims have a right to practice their religion, but they shouldn't coerce their religion on others.
Yep.
That's my next volume is about, La ikraha fid din. Because when you do so, first of all, if you coerce people to be like hijab, let's say. I mean, Iran forces women to wear hijab, right? True. Afghanistan does it. True. Well, ideally, a Muslim woman maybe should wear a hijab. That's wonderful.
But still has nothing to do with this. Yep.
But some ladies don't, and they can't, or they're not that traditional or conservative observant. We should respect it all. If we say you should do it, if you force it, first of all, there's no religious value in whatever is forced.
Right.
It should come from within, right? And you can nourish that faith, you can preach that faith, but you cannot create it from imposition. Second, whatever you impose, it will be somebody's Islam.
Yes.
Like you and I can agree that praying 5 times a day is fard, but somebody will come and say, ISIS will come and say, well, you're all kuffar because you vote or something like that. I mean, whatever is right, even in the Sunni world, we say also, it's not just even the 4 madhab. Today, there are many modern issues, people disagree. So I believe in keeping the state as neutral as possible and the state as protector of everybody's rights without getting into theological disputes. And let those theological issues and beliefs be lived by individuals and communities. Right. I think that's a healthier model.
Much more.
The West came to the solution, especially in the US and before that Britain, because they had the same problem. Yeah. One church was coming to power and saying these are all infidels or heretics and persecuting them. True. So they find the solution in separating of church and state, as they call it. Now, in Islam, people say, oh, we have this. We should also understand that we are not living at the same time with the early caliphs or the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I mean, it was a different social structure. Yeah. If all Muslims were following the same prophet, there was
nation state, different communities, different language.
Actually, there was a dispute right after him. Who was going to be? I mean, there was never this kind of ideal, situation, Muslim state where everybody agreed on things. Now, one advantage of traditional states was the state was very limited anyway. Yeah, it didn't have much power. There was one caliph in Baghdad, and they didn't have institutions that control society. A lot of things were ad hoc and regional. Now in modern states today, where the states really have uniform laws, institutions, and bureaucracies, we should keep them neutral and as neutral as possible, as opposed to thinking we should conquer it in the name of Islam, which will be always somebody's conquest, like true. Taliban's conquest. That's true. As opposed to others.
So you talk about the reforms, and I read a book about reopening the Muslim minds, right? So how do you see there are 2 ways to reform and tell Muslim intelligentsia and the scholars, you have to progress in your understanding. Quran is there, Sunnah is there, but this is your understanding which need to be revised, which need to be relearned, reconstruct. And there are movements, as you just told us, that even in the Ottomans, the reforms just started, and then we see in the Egypt, Muhammad Abdahu, Rashid Raza, they all reform, and Sayyid Ahmad Khan in there. But how do you see, if we just reform under the pressure and try to accommodate the needs of society, and try to turn the religious faith and just accept it as people will like it? If there's no principled approach towards the reforms, how do you see the main structure of religion will be preserved? You can just stand and say, I want to reform the things, and from today we think this God command is not relevant to the current situation, or maybe the Western powers, we can just reform it. So if there's no principled approach, do you think this formula of reform will go far?
It won't. And that approach, say, oh, there's zarura, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we have to overcome this because there is a zarura and we have to not implement this. And somebody will come and say, why are you not implementing this in the Sharia? I think instead of that, that's why we need a more methodological approach. And that's why I'm interested in the tradition called Islamic modernism, right? Sayyid Ahmed Khan wrote about this 100 years ago. And others, Abduh, definitely, Muhammad Abduh. A scholar from your country, Fazlur Rahman, I think was very important. I think I learned a lot from his book, Fazlur Rahman Malik, who was a professor at University of Chicago. And he, for example, calls for understanding the Quran in its historical context and understanding the intentions, the maqasid of the Quranic injunctions, let alone other things in the Sharia. And also, I think we need a primacy of the Quran over the Hadith literature, because some people have turned it upside down. I think many of the controversial issues in Islamic law today come from the Hadith sources, apostasy issues, blasphemy, a lot of issues about women's rights. There are, of course, noble Hadiths too. And when we say Hadiths criticize, na'udzu billah, we're not criticizing what the Prophet said.
Yeah, that's true.
But these are reports, canonized, written down, decades, almost 200, some cases, 200 years later. I think we need a bit more Quran-centered approach to the content criticism of hadith, not just the isnad, but the metan, the content of it as well. So there's a whole, I think, sometimes modernists is used as a slur or criticism, but I mean, I use the term in the sense that, well, we are in a different era. For example, people say in traditional times, no Islamic scholar would allow Muslims to live outside of the lens of Islam.
True.
Now, why? Because they wouldn't be safe.
It's a
which
war.
country? I mean, well, what are the alternatives to Dar al-Islam? There are the Mongols who come and slaughter millions of you, and there are the Crusaders come and slaughter millions of you. I mean, but we're living in Dallas now. I mean, you're living in Dallas. I'm visiting. I live in Washington. We're living in a non-Muslim majority country, which has something called constitution, which says the government will not, interfere in religion, and which guarantees our religious freedom. Some people are pushing against that. Hopefully, they won't get their way. Some crazies out there. But thanks to this, oh my God, this is freedom. Actually, we are more free here than we would be in many Muslim majority countries. That's true. Right? Because of politics, because of some religious bigotry, and so on and so forth. So therefore, to say our scholars didn't allow this. No, actually, some reform has already taken place in Islam. I mean, slavery is gone. I mean, how did it happen? 200 years ago, it was there, and some people are saying it's in the Sharia, you cannot touch it.
True.
So I think we should understand that Islam was born at a time which is very different than ours. It elevated humanity. I would defend every commandment of the Quran showing how a moral change it brought to that society. But it brought to that society sometimes. Sometimes we don't have the same issue.
True.
We don't have zihar issues between men. We don't know what it is, right? I mean, but the Quran was also giving us a direction there. So that's why I think Fazlur Rahman's approach of finding intentions, maqasid al-sharia, comes towards that approach, is important. So with these approaches, I think we need to. So one thing, because we are under threat for 200 years, from Western powers, sometimes Russians and others, from Soviets, right? I mean, Afghans. Because we are under threat, sometimes we stick too much to whatever is back there. We're not going to change it because they're talking about it. But that also is, and they're saying, and they tell us, don't take the West as your guide. But I'm saying, you are taking as your guide. Because you're saying, I will do exactly whatever, the opposite of what they're saying.
That's true.
So we don't have to please anyone. But if we want the message of Islam to resonate in the conscience of humanity today, and also we want to solve our own issues. We want to stop targeting each other for being from a different sect.
True.
We want to stop coercion in religion, which doesn't even help anything, right? These are our real issues, so we should be able to discuss those.
Okay.
And I think we might have a higher ground to say something to other people.
And maybe the
more.
higher scholarship will come up with some principled approach of
Exactly, yeah,
reforms.
yeah.
You know? Okay.
Ghamidi Sahib has done a great work on this. I've been following him in Pakistan, and I know he's been threatened for this even in Pakistan. So thank you for everything he's done and you're doing with him. And all the, and his,
how do you see the future of political Islam? Like, there are the movements in reaction of these isms you see around the world, and then the political Islam theory came, and I see as a student of knowledge that their duration has been finished. Now there are some new movements, and maybe we will go back towards these jihadist groups, and they're very, very in our society. There's a very small group of people who just want to fight and succeed, which they will never. So how do you think the phenomena of the political Islam raised by Sayyid Maududi and then Sayyid Qutb and all around it?
Well, political Islam is a big spectrum, right? I mean, I think Sayyid Qutb and Maududi are the two big giants there. I'm not on the same page with them. Right? I mean, I respect them. I understand why they were thinking certain things. I read them. I read, Yoldaki Isharetler, as we call it, or the signposts, milestones. In college, I was so fascinated by it. But, I'm not there because I think they depicted Islam as a revolutionary political idea to come to power.
Yes.
Right? And how to come to power is also sometimes violently or with revolution or through a military route, right? I mean, we have tested this. It didn't work well.
Yep.
I mean, we have seen that it didn't work well. In Pakistan, Islamization of laws, that's actually a mild version. In Sudan, it came to power with military. In Iran, the Shiite version, Khomeini, came to power and just imposed. Now, today's Iran is under attack, and I want this war to end. I don't want innocent Iranians to keep suffering more under this campaign. But also, we should see that the Iranian regime, by imposing Islam on society, by forcing women to wear hijab, didn't achieve anything good. It actually raised a anti-religious generation. I mean, the Iranian diaspora is infamous.
Yeah, I see one article in your book about this.
Yes, there's an article. It's titled "How Compulsion in Iran Made Iran Less Religious."
Yes.
I mean, there are polls in Iran that, it's of course done with urban people, but many people even don't identify as Muslim. There's a new Zoroastrianism, and so because Islam became so associated with an authoritarian government, people's anger at the government turned against Islam as well.
Yes.
Now, that's a wrong thing to do, but it is inevitable in some cases. So I think all that approach was wrong. However, you can have a political Islam, which says Islam teaches us justice and, honesty, and we will be just and honest politicians, and you can come to power and you can serve everybody else. I mean, I think it should not be blanketly demonized. For example, the Nahda movement in Tunisia, I think it was
Rashid
al-Ghannouchi, who's in jail now, unfairly for several years now because of Tunisia's turn towards authoritarianism, unfortunately. I think his movement, they call him post-Islamist sometimes. I mean, that's a good term. Like, he definitely gave up this idea of you will capture the state, put Sharia into the legal system and impose it. So that is the wrong, and of course the violent versions of those is the worst ones. We should understand that this was wrong, but also some people who are preaching about the evils of political Islam today have their own agendas. They just want to suppress any movement that is critical of them. They just want to suppress any critical of Western designs in the region. So I think we should read the nuance. I mean, Turkey's AKP is political Islam too, if you put it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, they're pious Muslims who enter into politics with references to Islam. Is it always a bad thing? Not always a bad thing. If your reference makes you a tolerant, decent, good politician. I mean, for example, people say AKP is a neo-Ottoman party. Well, that's good. Thanks to that, they opened churches and synagogues that was closed under the Republic. Because they said Ottoman Empire allowed pluralism. Or on the Kurdish issue, they've been more tolerant than the secularists. But if you extract that from, I'm a sultan, nobody criticized me, so that's the bad side. So I think just like in Christianity, I ask people, what is political Christianity? Is it the Crusaders or Martin Luther King? I love Martin Luther King, but not the Crusaders. So I think it is inevitable that religion will inspire religious people in terms of their political beliefs as well. But that is different from having a militant, theocratic, oppressive religious state agenda versus saying, as a good Muslim, I'm inspired by these good values of Islam and I want to do politics. And so that is, I think, okay.
Okay. Okay, right. So how do you see the relation between the West and the Muslim countries? Because post-World War II scenario that we know there's a new world order and the US is a super king all above the humanity and all above the nations. And they want us to act as a civilized, obedient. But Muslims, majority of the Muslim countries, they have their political regime and they accept this narrative as a fact that, there's a superpower, we cannot go in the direct confrontation. But there are small groups of the religious minorities in even Pakistan, in even Bangladesh, Indonesia. They want that confrontation. And you are in the Cato Institute and you have a huge experience meeting the people. How West see this confrontation? Do they think that this is something coming from the DNA of the Muslim? They never accept us as a community, or there are some regional things, some political things going on, maybe in the Palestine, maybe in the Iran. In general, we can adjust with the Muslim communities.
Just like we're not monolithic, the West is not monolithic, right? The first thing is to say that. Today, I look into the Western world and I see people, institutions, groups that are genuinely respectful of human rights and want to defend Muslims when they're oppressed as well. That's why we've seen people speaking out for Gaza or other cases where Muslims are oppressed or exposing important stuff there, some human rights organizations, for example. But there are others who just want to have their geostrategic interest, whatever that is, and they don't care about the harm that they're giving to our people, right? So we shouldn't put them all in one, right? And we should understand that there are fascists in the West, honestly. As like there are very good, conscientious people, and we shouldn't lump this all together. We should, quite the contrary, make that distinction so we can engage with good people and marginalize the bad people. Now, there's definitely a new wave of anti-Islam narrative in the West, in America and in Europe, partly because of this concern with immigrants, nativist part of it, that's in Europe a little bit, partly as a product of the Arab-Israeli tension. Some hardline pro-Israeli figures are depicting Islam as an evil force so that Israel is not going to be criticized for what it's doing. There's sometimes some Christian bigotry. There are other humane Christians which defend our rights as well. I think one thing we should do is not give these people the ammunition that they need against Islam. I mean, I see sometimes some Muslims do that. Allahu Akbar, we'll put the flag in Europe 100 years later. It will be all like, there are guys who say stuff like that. Now, that is in principle wrong. I mean, this kind of militaristic, domineering, conquer, that's not even just a fantasy. It's not going to happen.
True.
But now, look at what those anti-Islamophobes are doing. They are finding all these people and exposing them for a reason, because it helps their propaganda to depict Islam as a inherently violent and commanding and oppressive religion, right? And there might be real issues to resolve. And I think, for example, I tell my fellow Muslims, we enjoy religious freedom when we have it. We're very happy to be able to give dawah in America or in the UK, and people become Muslims. We say, Alhamdulillah, brother, come. So he's an apostate from Christianity. Nobody targets him for being. So we cannot do this and then say, oh, we actually killed the apostates. I mean, that sort of thing. I mean, so that's why actually I'm working on those issues. I'm working on issues in Islam that are unacceptable from human rights perspective. Now, people will say, why do we care about human rights? This is the kuffar invention or something. Well, you need it when actually you are bombed and invaded, and that's the actual reference that you can only refer to. We need human rights. We understand we need it when we are persecuted or when we see it as a way out of that persecution. So I think one thing, nobody criticized Islam 500 years ago about lack of religious freedom or women's rights.
All are the same at that time.
We were better.
We were better, right?
Jews were escaping from Europe, coming to the Ottoman Empire. Standards got higher in the West. At the same time, very bad imperialism developed in the West too, but we should be able to see the difference between those. On the other hand, our standards got worse. We became less tolerant to minorities.
That's true.
I mean, my city, Istanbul, was 1/3 non-Muslim under the Khilafah. Istanbul, in the beginning of the 20th century, 1/3 of the city was Greek, Armenian, or Jewish. Expulsion and all that. So our standards got worse, but sometimes because of nationalism. So I think we should raise our standards. We should raise our human rights standards and deal with issues. And we should have a message of Islam, which I think is rooted in the Quran.
Yeah.
That will appeal to the conscience of decent human beings around the world. Now, it does already in many issues. When we teach about spirituality, when we teach about God, when we teach about afterlife, Islam already appeals to a lot of people who are lost in their way, who are in this materialistic world, need some, moral compass or some transcendence. So I think the morals of our religion, the family morals, they're already strong. We should keep them strong. But we don't need this kind of oppressive, we cut people's head for this sort of, understanding of the Sharia, right? Hudud, obsessed, and so on and so forth. And that's one reason I wrote the latest book, No Compulsion in Religion, No Exceptions, Islamic Arguments for Religious Freedom.
So hopefully tomorrow we have a session here, La Iqra fi Din Bila Istisna, the new book wrote by Brother Mustafa. Last question, Brother Mustafa, I think maybe this is a topic for your next book because we see a biggest reforms of the centuries in Saudi Arabia, from hardcore Wahhabism, Salafism thought to the progressive things that happening in the Jeddah, doing the concerts and dancing all around. How do you see, what is the main reason behind these sort of reforms? How the society because we see Saudi society deep-rooted in the religious beliefs, and as a student of the religion, we think, something will be changed ideologically, then the Muslims will maybe change their behaviors and then they can become a more moderate. How this all happened in Saudi Arabia?
I believe states should not try to engineer society in any direction, right? So in Saudi Arabia, I'm actually happy that the Mutawwa has been restrained, the religion police. And they're not going after women to wear your hijab or this and that sort of thing, because I think that's not good for Islam. Some people think that Islam means that we control a territory and make everybody in it wear the hijab and pray 5 times a day. It's like a military discipline. True. No, Islam, it begins with your heart, with your belief, with your conscience, with your iman, and your practice should come out of that iman. Every society has some public morality standards, but I think this coercive understanding of Islam had gone too far. I'm glad that it is being restrained. Now, when it is restrained, do you have to do a pop concert? Well, some people maybe do that, but that's not my thing. That's not probably your thing.
Yep.
A lot of Muslims will be already Muslims anyway. We're Muslims not because somebody's telling us to do. We're like Muslims in America fast not because there's a religion police in Dallas telling them to fast. You don't need that.
It's true.
That's why we don't need Ramadan laws in the Muslim world too. I wrote about that. So now, one thing, when in a very strict society, which has been pushed for a long time, when you open the box,
there's a reaction.
Maybe, oh my God.
Yeah.
So there's a reaction to it.
Things will come down.
Maybe, hopefully, if things, I've seen a lot of people in the West who lived their lives of parties and dancing and became Sufi at age 60 or something like that. They realize that it's empty and there's nothing big in there, right? So, societies find their way and we should try to influence our societies towards the better. But the Saudi experience, you take the Mutawwa out and then all these crazy things come out, shows that it was not right. It was not helping anyway. Right?
Yeah,
so
that's true.
And I think in the modern world, Muslims will be exposed to everything. There's no way you can escape. Like you can't. We have an old way of protecting the zone. Like Iran was banning satellite dishes or something. They're not anymore.
It never worked.
Yeah, people will see what other societies are.
Yes.
People will get exposed to atheist websites or something like that. We should not protect the zone. We should protect the Muslim individual, the believers, our children, their character, their beliefs. So it's about education. And in the West, you see how this happens. America is most free country in the world, but you have very conservative Christians. They go to church and they don't do any of these things. There's Hollywood there. There's other things happen there. But you can, in a free society without government really dictating religion on people, you can have a healthier religiosity. And I think we see examples of that. And that's a healthier model than trying to engineer society to a certain direction.
Thank you very much, Brother Mustafa. I'm very honored and there's a lot of things learned from you, and hopefully, inshallah, we'll continue these sort of discussions with you later on.
Inshallah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.